So the word firmament, rakia, is a part of the Old Testament, or what the Old Testament refers to as a part of the heavens, plural. We have the firmament in which the birds fly, as I'm being redundant here, but just follow me, and the clouds float. We also have the firmament, the heavens, where the celestial bodies exist, the sun, the moon, the planets, and the stars. And finally, we have the heavens or firmament, where God, the celestial beings, and our future eternal home exist. One of the definitions of firmament, rakia, is the vault of heaven supporting the waters above. That's one of the definitions of firmament. The vault of heaven supporting the waters above, not the waters below, not the waters under the earth. No, the waters above, giving room to this canopy or that covered the earth at one time. Like I said, you still find clouds that are not noxious or fatal covering the earth like we find on no other planet in our system. This is a place where God placed the vaporized canopy of water, this rakia. The canopy turned the Earth's atmosphere into a planet-wide hyperbaric oxygen chamber. That means it was a place of health. It changed the atmosphere, or the atmosphere was completely different, totally different than it is today. The atmospheric pressure was different, and the climate was totally different, thus making the entire Earth a climatic paradise. There were no polar caps as we know them now. No polar caps. There was no equator that was extremely hot. There were no deserts. The entire Earth was a paradise. We'll speak more of man's original created state in Genesis chapter 2. But in turn, the environment promoted healing and growth and maintained a form of longevity long after the loss of humanity's immortality due to the fall. Like I said, we're going to speak more of that in chapter 2. But before man's fall, man was immortal. The Bible says in Romans chapter 6 that death entered in because of sin. So for the period of time that man existed without sin, he was immortal, meaning that time to him also was irrelevant, just like it was irrelevant to God. God made man in his image, and just as God was immortal, man too was immortal, and he was created to be that way. So I would love to speak a little bit more to that. If you want to get a little bit of evidence of the possibility of immortality, I'd just like you to look up the Turritopsis nutricula. The Turritopsis nutricula, I've been following this creature since it was first discovered just a little over 2 decades ago. And it's a medusa, it's a jellyfish that has a DNA link that every other living creature should have. And it has the extreme potential to be immortal. It can die if it's washed up on shore or some creature kills it, but if not, if it's in a perfect environment that has no life-threatening antagonisms, it will live forever. It reproduces, and its whole cellular system reverts to an infant state, and it grows. It would be interesting to know, as if when it reverts to infant state and it grows, we believe that they live by instinct, but if it was a sentient creature, would it retain the knowledge that it had when it was at the age of maturity? That would be an interesting thing. Was that part of our immortal structure, that we would completely rejuvenate? But we can take a look at this, that the hyperbaric chamber, oxygen chamber, that God created with this canopy, created an environment of health and cellular reproduction and healing after the fall, after man was a mortal creature. So we see between the fall and the flood, there was a total of 1,666 years, and there were 10 generations between the fall and the flood, and we find the average lifespan, I have that written here, that to be almost 800 years. I'll give the exact figure to that in a minute. But I've known of this, in my university studies years ago, about the fossiliferic evidence that there is in Antarctica of coniferous and evergreen and deciduous forests that covered Antarctica. Antarctica before was a paradise with abundant flora. And so here are some examples of fossils. We have ferns and we have a deciduous leaf fossil, and they're not in scarcity, they're in abundance in areas of Antarctica. Some of them are in ice fields that, as long as man can conceive, have always been under snow. Not always, we're talking about millennia, or more than millennia, thousands of millennia have been under ice. And we still have fossils of forests there, of coniferous forest, evergreen forest, and deciduous forest. And this particular source is from the University of Melbourne. I've seen a plethora of different sources, and this was, in doing the study, I just chose that source as one. The others are just as viable as you do your own research. So research is not Wikipedia, it's actually studying this, the situation. So this canopy condensed and fell during the flood. But I'll give much more information on this in Genesis chapter 7. We're going to get to that. But we're just talking about chapter 1 and then on the second day of creation. Meanwhile, from the register in Genesis chapter 5 and from Genesis chapter 9, verse 29, and Genesis chapter 11, verse 11, we see that from the fall to the flood, those are those 1,666 years, and it's really interesting, 1666 was when the flood came. And shortly after, people lived an average of 834 years, counting Noah and Shem's lives. So that's not 10 generations, that's actually 11 generations counting Shem. But that's what we call a Toledoth, and it's a genealogy that explains many things. So we have that, an average, because we have Enoch, who he only had 365 years registered in his life, and he was raptured. And then we have Lamech, Noah's father, who lived 777 years, and so we have that variation. And then we have Methuselah, who lived 969 years, and Noah, who lived 950 years. Adam lived 930 years. So we have a number of, we have a good pendulum there of years. And surely Enoch would have lived many more years if God didn't have a purpose and hadn't taken him at 365 years. But the average turns out to be 834 years. And so we have that. But so that's highly atypical. They were humans. They were our ancestors. And all of humanity came from 8 people that were in the ark. Now, the Bible is just the opposite of theoretical science, because the theoretical science say we started simple and evolved for some reason out of nothing, kind of a spontaneous generation, into a more complex being, which goes completely against even the second law of thermodynamics, that things start out organized and degenerate, because all molecules seek stability, and stability is basically disintegration. The word neither develops, it can't break down anymore. So we find God creating man an extremely advanced creature. I'll get into that in chapter 2 when it talks more about the perfection or just the awesomeness of man, and I'll develop that. But the incredible brain that God gave us, and different things like that, which is not anything that we have now in comparison to what he gave us originally. God created us to be the lords of the earth and incredible creatures. So we'll take a look at that in further studies. You'll notice that in the Toledah in Genesis 11, the lifespans of the descendants of Shem decreased dramatically to the point that in Genesis 12, Abraham is counted as an aged man, so as not to say an old man, an aged man who should not be capable of begetting children. So, but you have to understand, Noah died during Abraham's life, or during Abraham's father's life. And Abraham died shortly after Shem, who lived 600 years. Shem lived 600 years, and Abraham lived to be 175 years, and he was a decrepit old man. And Shem, who died rather young in comparison to the rest of the antediluvians, and he died at 600 years old because he was he lived a majority of his life on the earth without the hydraulic canopy, or the canopy that covered the earth, because it fell during the flood. And we find lifespans decreasing. This is not my idea. You can just read in Genesis chapter 5, the Toledoth that's there, and the Toledoth that's in Genesis chapter 10 and 11, especially chapter 11. And so you'll find that the lifespans were drastically cut short because of the absence, or because of a drastic change after the flood. And we say that that change is the loss of that water above the firmaments. Like I said, it's still, rakia, still holds that meaning because it originally did. Those heavens that held the water, the vault that held the water that were above, was above. Now, I'm going to explain briefly the greenhouse effect of this hydraulic canopy. We can just imagine a greenhouse. You know, you have a glass roof, and the sun, the light and the heat gets through, and it creates, even though it's winter outside, it's still spring or very warm on the inside, creating an environment that you can grow plants all year long. And so we can see that's on the left hand. On the right side, we can see that there are no extremes of hot or cold. So this canopy, I call it the hydraulic canopy, is a protective canopy that would greatly shelter the Earth's environment, resulting in a very productive greenhouse effect. Just a little bit more information. So a moderate or warm climate prevailing from pole to pole like in a greenhouse. Whereas Siberia, what we call Siberia today, it didn't exist as it did. Then I'll explain that in chapter 7. I'll explain what happened there, why it wasn't the same thing. But we have this hydraulic canopy filtering out gamma rays, X-rays, and ultraviolet rays. And we have the visible light spectrum passing through this canopy. Infrared, microwaves, and radio waves can pass through. None of those are life-threatening. Another thing that would have happened is very possibly the outer surface of this canopy probably froze, which would have been a spectacle from space, reflecting the light, or light refraction. The rings around Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, they're basically ice particles, and so they call us prisms, you know, and they give off these incredible rainbows that are formed of rings. I've heard some creation scientists, or even other theologians that have espoused the canopy theory talk about the possibilities that Earth used to have rings because of this canopy. That must have been a glorious looking planet, because the other planets have rings, but they have a deadly environment. But this is a glorious environment, beautiful to observe from faith, from other parts, from space, from other parts of the heavens, and it sustained life. The only place we have life as we know it in our solar system, at least. So, some of the initial promoters of this position are Dr. Walt Brown, Dr. John Whitcomb, Dr. Henry Morris, Dr. Joseph Dillow, Dr. Larry Vardaman, and many others. Doctors Whitcomb and Morris presented their thesis in their groundbreaking book, The Genesis Flood, that was published by the Presbyterian and Reformed Publishing in 1961. I read the book numerous times, decades ago, 40, 50 years ago, and fascinating postulation. Of course, there were some parts of Morris and Whitcomb's creation ideology that I love them as brothers, but I don't espouse theologically. We differ. Just that because I'm an OCE, an Orthodox OCE, and they were young earthers. But they did have some excellent ideas, and they were excellent brothers, and they were brilliant minds and very professional. They all had their doctorates in not in theology. They weren't theologists. I think that's probably one of the things that cause us to differ in some of our creationist ideas. But they were scientists, astrophysicists, mathematicians, and engineers, and various other disciplines in the scientific and doctoral world. So them and a plethora of others, hundreds of others of scientists and doctors, not only embrace intelligent design, but creation science, and many, and they embrace this. Now they're different schools of thought, and respect them all. But let's go, before we conclude here today. God said, let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so, and God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together called seas. And God saw that it was good, and God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed and fruit, and all that because light existed there. And we have, it says, it goes on, verses 9 to 13, Genesis chapter 1, trees bearing fruit, which is their seed, each according to its kind on the earth. And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetations, plants yielding seed according to their own kind, which says that evolution, even with plants or animals, it says everything gives birth according to its own kind. We call that today DNA. Genesis in the first chapter talks about locking a species in to its kind because of DNA. It doesn't jump from one tree to another, genetic tree to another. And so the earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed according to their own kinds, and trees bearing fruit, in which is their seed according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and morning, and that's the third day. So we have the first evidence of life on earth and dry land. And we know that there are plants in the waters also, and in the oceans and lakes. And I'm talking about plant life that came before fauna. Flora came first. And so God arranges the water-covered planet on day 3 and brings out the dry land. This is second day. He separated the waters. Third day, he brought dry land out. And this has prepared the way for all the flora that replenishes and beautifies the earth and sea. I say replenishes because we have plants that consume CO2 and emit oxygen, expel oxygen, and we can't live without the plants on the earth. You know, you can't. Now you say, well, I don't like to eat vegetables. I want to eat meat. Well, the meat you eat eats vegetables, and so you got that. God puts first the food that the animals that you might like to eat, as well as the plants you might like to eat. He gave the plants first so that they can feed upon themselves. This is the order of creation. And so in our next study, we'll cover the 4th day of creation with a surprising postulation that should bring you even more understanding to the scriptures. So we're going to see that in the next study. We pray that this study has helped you grow in understanding, at least given you some thought-provoking insights as to God's perfect and the perfection of his creation, his perfect work. So may the Lord bless you, and we'll see you in the next study. God bless you. Thank you for being with us.
Introducing the new Xulon Press book, Is Our Gospel the Gospel? By Dr. Prince Maurice Parker. Is Our Gospel the Gospel? Is available in Christian bookstores and online. Purchase it today.